Beautiful viewers, thanks for joining us. This is the maiden edition of Encounter with History. My name is Uminjai and thanks for being there. And in this maiden episode, we're looking at nationalism and the struggle for independence. While nationalism and the Gambia struggle for independence was a protracted battle spearheaded by activists and then of course politicians of the time. And the Gambia, being one of the oldest British colonies, did not use bows and arrows and guns to liberate itself from the colonial domination. In this maiden edition, Ibrahima Balde takes a closer look at nationalism and the Gambia struggle for independence.
The colonial conquest left a huge tax for countries to start all over again and begin the protracted struggle of building a nation-state virtually from scratch. At the end of the so-called partition of Africa, widely known as the Berlin Conference in 1884-1885, imagine world powers subsequently took control of their conquered territories.
For West Africa and Gambia in particular, we have to trace the origins of modern nationalism, even before the arrival of the Europeans, because you had resistance leaders. Like in the Gambia's case, a good example being, for the Kabadumbia, Alpha Molo, Musa Molo, for the Silla, and much earlier Kemington Kamara. These were colonial warriors.
Under the new dispensation, colonies bore the brunt of the colonial yoke. Around the world, a new wave of thinking started to emerge. Resentment about the lack of infrastructure and the absence of basic amenities began to creep in.
Why was the Gambia so much neglected by the colonial government? Okay? Now, neglect in the sense that, for example, education was left entirely in the hands of the missionaries, the Catholics, the Anglicans, and the Methodists. Okay? The colonial government divested itself completely from the provision of education. Just one good example. And now, because of this, the living conditions, of the people, became that of abject poverty. And Batos, the colonial capital, also was for a long time, like a laughingstock.
Among the world leaders, there was a rift. On his way to Casablanca in Morocco to plan the Allied European strategy for the next phase of World War II, United States President Franklin D. Roosevelt passed through the Gambia. Realizing the poor state of the capital, Batos, Roosevelt personally said he would later take it up with Prime Minister Winston Churchill. He is widely quoted to have told his son Elliot, quote, "I must tell Churchill what I found out about his British Gambia today."
He was not impressed. His journey from the port of Banjul to Yundum Airport, he was not impressed with the poverty. He saw. Roosevelt told Churchill that, in a 30 minutes drive from the port to the airport, what I saw was an eyesore. It's a shame that you should be ruling these people and not be doing anything for them. And many people think that it was because of those comments, by Roosevelt, that Churchill, immediately when he went back to London, he asked, the Secretary of State for Colonies to design a development plan for the Gambia, which was called the Blackburn Report, which came out in 1946.
The outbreak of the Second World War in 1945 took a heavy toll on the African soldiers who were opted to fight alongside the Allied powers. As soon as the dust settled down, colonists began to look inwards and demanded an end to exploitation and living a life in poverty. In the case of the Gambia, a thoroughbred politician, Edward Francis Small, and many others were quite critical of the British administration in the Gambia. Small was partly inspired by the American Revolution, where he borrowed the now famous saying, quote, "No taxation without representation."
The end of the Second World War was one of the major events in which we could peg the nationalist fever. Although in different parts of Africa, it may vary, because in 1935, for example, when Ethiopia was invaded, a lot of people would say this was the beginning of the nationalist movement in Africa. But coming back to Gambia, after fighting the bills at the Legislative Council, with small spearheading that campaign, one could say that this was the beginning of the rise of African nationalism and Gambian nationalism.
Colonial rule in the Gambia was generally underpinned by economic exploitation. A vast majority of Gambians who were paying all types of taxes, such as hot and cattle tax, felt the need for the colonial government to augment conditions of living. As more and more Gambians began agitating for independence or internal self-government, more political parties started to sprout. In the 1950s, colony-based political parties emerged. The first party to be formed in the Gambia was in 1951, called the Democratic Party under Reverend J.C. Faye.
J.C. Faye at the time was teaching at St. Mary's School, so he was sent over there to establish a mission school. And people like Asan Musa Kamara, people like John Jao, Denham Jones, and all these people were students at Christi Kunda at the time. Now, during that period, J.C. Faye had established an enormous rapport with the chiefs and the people in the area, because one of the problems that was a perennial problem was seasonal hunger. Now, as a result of that, the chiefs of the upper reaches of the River Gambia recommended him to represent them in the Legislative Council in Banjul. Now, Faye, because of his experiences, came with that fervor. And because of his experiences, he was able to input in legislation within the council.
The Muslim Congress Party was formed a year later in 1952 under the leadership of I.M. Gaba Jahumpa.
The leaders of the Muslim Congress Party, Mr. I.M. Gaba Jahumpa, and the leader of the United Party, the Pierre Sarinjai, were also beginning to show signs of involvement in Gambian politics. So I could safely say that this was the beginning of the rise of Gambian nationalism.
The year 1952 also saw the establishment of the United Party, UP, under P.S. Njai, which managed to lead the poll in elections to the Legislative Council in 1954. The Gambia People's Party, GPP, existed for a while under St. Clair Juve, but he soon died after he was defeated in 1954. While the Gambian elites were pressing forward with their demand for independence, Ghana, Sierra Leone, Ivory Coast, Nigeria, and Senegal had become independent. In 1961, the colonial government decided to assemble the Bathurst and London Constitutional Conferences. The outcome of the talks was the 1962 Constitution that paved the way for internal self-rule.
We tried to agree on a form of friendly ties with Senegal because all the parties at that time agreed that Gambia and Senegal must try to harmonize their relationship. That, we cannot live side by side with that sort of distance or gap. We are the same ethnic people, languages, and our commonalities far outnumbered our differences. So as early as that, a treaty of association was made, and that is the loosest type of the three forms of international country or within associations.
Historians say the British began to give serious consideration to the future of the Gambia with various solutions, including the Channel Island option and the Malta option.
Up to 1964, the British, they were hesitant about what to do with Gambia. Should they grant independence? Okay. Should they allow us to federate with Senegal? Should they allow us to federate with Sierra Leone? Okay. Or should they do the Maltese, type? The Maltese, type was that you have internal self-government. Okay. All internal self-government. Okay. Except foreign affairs and defense will be, which will remain in the hands of the British. Because that's how Malta started. When they became independent in 1964, it was like a pseudo-independent. It was like a half-baked independence. They could collect their own taxes, run their own police force. But when it comes to foreign affairs, and to defense matters, that rested, with Whitehall in London.
The Gambia's independence struggle was not met with violent resistance. It was a peaceful transfer of power attended by hundreds of people at the Makati Square in Banjul. However, there were people who thought the country was too small to govern itself.
Barclay Rice himself was an agent. I have to remind you that he came and wrote that book, which is not good for a kindergarten. I believe you've read it. The English was bad, there was no cohesion, no coherence, there was no agenda. The only agenda was to ridicule the Gambia so that it will tally with the colonial idea of federation, that you must lean on someone. You cannot be by yourself.
On the day itself, 18 February 1965, all eyes were on Prime Minister Sadauda Kairaba Jawara and his new government as the country had finally liberated itself from the colonial shackles. 53 years after gaining independence, the Gambia has produced 3 leaders. The country has built numerous institutions. Education has improved remarkably. On the first day in cabinet, writer and journalist Barclay Rice revealed in his book, The Birth of an Improbable Nation, that there was only one university graduate in cabinet. 53 years on, the Gambia continues to grow in leaps and bounds.
Well, beautiful viewers, that brings us to the end of this maiden episode of Encounter with History. And I hope you've learned lessons from this episode. Until we come your way again, goodbye.